My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Oh, 1 year on, is America wealthy again? Well, this time last year, the Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on imports from more than 60 countries with especially steep duties on China. Well, markets plunged, forcing a partial rollback within weeks, but the damage was already done. Businesses faced rising costs and uncertainty, while consumers saw higher prices. And countries scrambled to make deals with the U.S., although in most cases, they only offered limited relief. A major turning point came this year. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down the tariffs that the Trump administration had implemented under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, saying it had overstepped its legal authority. The move could trigger up to $150 billion in refunds, although it may take months or even years for businesses to actually get their money back in what's been deemed a complex process. The U.S. president then pivoted quickly to replace those Liberation Day tariffs with temporary 10% global import duty for 150 days under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, after which Congress would need to approve their extension. At the same time, Mr. Trump has ordered new investigations under other laws that could allow him to reimpose those tariffs. So where do things stand now? Well, tariffs did shrink the U.S. trade deficit with China. America's overall deficit with the world grew due to trade diversion. Domestically, U.S. manufacturing jobs declined. Some sectors did see gains, though it may not necessarily have been tied to tariffs. American consumers, they continue to grapple with inflation, with some businesses taking a big hit. Southeast Asian economies, they were among the hardest hit by the tariffs, but the region has for now weathered the shock, helped by temporary buffers like front-loaded shipments, delayed duties, and targeted sector exemptions. And global supply chains have been permanently reshaped, with decades of free trade and multilateral norms no more. And for more, we're joined by Jeff Moon, President of China Moon Strategies, who's also former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China Affairs. So, Jeff, 1 year since Liberation Day, 1 year of reciprocal tariffs, what has Donald Trump achieved in your books?
Well, the results are mixed. On the upside, the Trump administration would say that using the leverage of these tariffs, they've negotiated trade deals with 20 countries. Many of those countries reduced tariffs for U.S. goods, and many also have increased foreign investment into the United States. But few of those deals are finalized and actually legally binding, and so there are ongoing discussions. The downside of all of this, of course, is that the aggressive attitude that the Trump administration has had has really challenged America's alliances overseas. It's undermined trust and increased suspicion of U.S. intentions. You know, as I look ahead, I have sort of a sense of deja vu. A year ago, Trump's tariffs were declared, suspended, negotiated, litigated, and then declared unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court has sent us back basically to square one, where Trump is now going to repeat the same cycle with a new round of tariffs, complete with the chaos that we saw over the past year.
Yeah, I want to know probably what's going to be different this time around, because in the last round of tariffs under IEEPA, we saw U.S. goods deficit, in fact, widen to $1.2 trillion, about 4% of GDP last year. And another goal of this Liberation Day was also to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., yet manufacturing job losses have actually accelerated.
Yes, well, Trump's supporters will claim that industrial output declined over the previous decade and actually last year recorded a 1.6% gain. They'll also tell you that even though 90,000 jobs were lost last year, that the losses were greater in previous years, so that's progress. But I'm not sure that that's really cause for celebration. As for the trade deficit with China actually increased last year, or decreased last year. But that trend is probably due to the fact that China has been transshipping goods through other countries. And the overall deficit that the U.S. has actually increased. And in the meantime, statistics just released within the past few days show that America's global trade deficit increased last month by about 5%. So evidence that Trump's trade policies are working is pretty thin.
Yeah, I mean, we did see that, imports from Thailand, Vietnam, they rose by more than 40%. These nations actually took over much of China's share. So, whether or not America has become less dependent on, Chinese goods is really hard to say. But we also see the impact on these middle powers. So the UK, the EU, Canada, Japan, they saw a 12% increase in trade, 15 bilateral deals apparently signed among themselves. Are we now seeing a more cohesive trading bloc that excludes the US?
There are certainly attempts to do that. I think China certainly would like to do something like that. I think what we're seeing, though, is plurilateral deals are increasing. Europe has concluded a deal with Mercosur, for example. I think they're also negotiating with Mexico. So, yes, there are an increased number of deals between countries that do not necessarily include the U.S. And, of course, the Canadian leader, Prime Minister Carney, has advocated that middle powers get together and try to work around the difficulties in dealing with the U.S. I think that's completely understandable. I think these are problems that Trump has brought upon himself.
Yeah, I want to look at what happens to the U.S. consumer as well, effectively decoupled from the cheaper goods in the rest of the world. And on top of that, investment in the U.S. also fell with inflation rate in the U.S. pushed up.
I'm not sure what your question is. Can you repeat that?
What does this mean for the U.S. consumer? I mean, effectively now decoupled from the cheaper goods that we're seeing, in the rest of the world. And on top of that, investment in the U.S. has also fallen. Inflation is also being pushed up.
Well, the U.S. is still the world's largest economy and the biggest market. I think that, and the evidence of that is the fact that so many of these countries want to reach some kind of a trade deal. So it's not that the opportunity of the U.S. market is evaporated or the U.S. is completely separated from the world market. It's just that trade trends are shifting to a certain extent, and that's notable and important. But the U.S. remains at the center of the world economy.
Yeah. Well, I also want to look at now, it's the Trump administration has pivoted to Section 122 tariffs. They're limited to 150 days unless Congress extends them. What kind of bearing do you think the current Iran war could have on Congress's decision? For example, is the administration likely to use a conflict to, I suppose, pressure Congress to extend those tariffs?
I think these are really two separate things. I think that the economic situation dealing with the tariffs and the military situation in Iran are two different things. I think, what Trump's obvious strategy is to find a replacement for his IEEPA tariffs. And he's locked on 122 for 150 days and then 301 and 232 thereafter. The problem that he's going to experience is that there's going to be a lot of litigation. There are legal vulnerabilities in all of these statutes that he's going to try to use. 122, for example, is for a balance of payments situation when we had the gold standard. It really doesn't apply right now. 301, for example, is vulnerable because Trump has reached all of these agreements with all of these countries. So what's the injustice that needs to be remedied by 301, for example? These are just examples of what's going to be going through the courts. He may find that his tariffs are invalidated as they were in the case of IEEPA. So we just need to see. In the meantime, you alluded to the question of refunds, which is also pending in the U.S. courts, and there's going to be a lot of litigation, and that would be an enormous hit on the U.S. Treasury when those refunds are made. And the judges seeing those cases are insisting that the government refund the money.
All right, Jeff, I really appreciate you breaking this down for us. Jeff Moon, the president, China Moon Strategies. He's also former assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China Affairs.